Welcome to In the Spotlight. I'm Abigail Pogrebin. JBS viewers, I am delighted to introduce you to JBS's new CEO, drumroll, Rabbi Justin Pines. I get to joke because we are friends. We got to know each other through the Shalom Hartman Institute, and I have enjoyed his teaching and relied on his wisdom, and it's just a pleasure to be sitting with you and to introduce you now more formally. Justin is the grandchild of 4 Holocaust survivors. Rabbi Pines is a Harvard lawyer turned Jewish educator. He served most recently as director of lay education at the Shalom Hartman Institute. He previously served as director of character development at Ramaz Middle School and as a senior fellow at the J.J. Greenberg Institute for the Advancement of Jewish Life, working closely with one of my heroes, Rabbi Irving Yitz Greenberg. Justin received his BA in Communications at the University of Pennsylvania. He's an alumnus of the Wexner Graduate Fellowship, and he received his rabbinic ordination from Yeshivat Hovevei Torah. Previously, Rabbi Pines practiced corporate law at Paul Weiss Rifkin Wharton and Garrison LLP. He lives with his family in Englewood, New Jersey, where he serves on the executive board of the Moriah School. And you have very cute children. That needs to be said.
That's most important.
Welcome to the broadcast that is now your family,
Sure.
JBS.
Thanks, Abby.
So glad that you have taken the helm as CEO. First of all, what does that mean? What would you say for those who, people know what a CEO is, but at JBS, what does it mean to be the CEO?
Sure. So first of all, thank you so much for having me here. It's great to be back in this chair with you, Abby, which is my first exposure to JBS was on this program with you a couple years ago now. So it's a pleasure to be back here with you. As far as your question, I think, Rabbi Golub left very large shoes to fill here, and he really created something very, very special. And I am here to try to lead the team, working with our larger team around taking that vision into the future, both working with and working closely with our existing community, our existing audience, growing that audience, thinking about the new content and material that our audience will be interested in, and kind of moving JBS into its next chapter.
That's wonderful, and I do want to give a huge shout out to the legacy JBS team because they have been extraordinary to me and I think to all the viewers watching. It really does feel like a family here, as professionally as it's run. And I want to get to your bio a little bit, but before I do, one of the things that I think is most urgent and important about JBS is that we want and we need a place that's a hub of smart and sensitive Jewish conversation. I'm not complimenting myself being smart. I'm talking about my guests and the other programming that it has. But a lot of people still don't know that JBS is here. So what can you say about trying to get JBS in front of more people and making it part of their kind of daily or weekly routine in terms of Jewish content?
Great. I think it's a great question. It's a really important question right now. So I think that step one is still continue to make the best content that we can make. Right? Strong content finds its way to eyeballs no matter what. So let's start with continuing to strengthen and improve our content and make it the best that it can be. I think stay in our lane of continuing to be pluralistic, representing different voices across the spectrum, having real conversations and not kind of just putting noise out there for the sake of putting noise out there. And also, not always being so serious, also being able to entertain our audience as well.
Yes, we have fun here at JBS.
Educate and inspire and entertain. So I think we have to do all those things. And then I think in terms of getting the word out there, a lot of it is word of mouth, but I think also trying to expand to where the people are. So as many of us know, JBS has been an amazing cable stalwart of the Jewish people. Much of the world now has moved beyond cable to other places. Social media platforms, all modern media platforms, YouTube, and we've kind of, even before my time, started building our muscle in that space, and I think that I hope to lead our team in building our muscle further. I think there's so many people that are out there, especially right now, who are very hungry for this type of content. They're feeling like devastatingly upset about what's been going on, the tragic events of October 7th, the explosion of anti-Semitism after that, the painful war that we're going through right now. All those things are causing people to really take a moment, take a breath, and think about those big questions. What is my relationship to Judaism? What is my relationship to the Jewish people? What is my relationship to the state of Israel? And I think they're looking for more than just sound bites. I think that sound bites might be the entree point onto programs like your program, but I think people are looking for more serious, thoughtful, inspiring educational opportunities to really ride that on-ramp back into their Jewish lives. And I think that we've played that role, and I think we can play that role even more broadly.
And I think what you're also hitting on is what Rabbi Golub felt so strongly about, was just the joy of Judaism, that he went kind of hard to depth and substance because he knew that that's kind of where so much of this comes alive. It's in the exploration, it's in the deep dive. And I know that that's been your kind of life's journey, is just falling in love with this inheritance of yours, and that it's not enough just to have been given this Jewish heritage and a Jewish education, which not every American Jew I know had to the extent that you did, but to choose it again and again, to learn more, to sort of swim in its waters, even in your adult life as a father, first as a professional. Kind of where does the Jewish substance learning, pushing, challenge, how's that alive for you, and I guess in your daily life and also in this job?
Great. So I think that a few things I'll say on that. First, I think one of the things that you're raising for me is also kind of a big moment that's coming up here more broadly before we get to me, is that there is a kind of a big focus on protecting Jewish bodies right now, which of course is so important, right? I used to work in middle school, as you mentioned. I think one of the first lessons I learned there was that safety's first. At the end of the day, if you're not keeping the kids safe, no one cares what you're teaching the kids. Safety comes first. And I think, yes, we have to prioritize the safety of Jewish bodies in North America, in Israel, across the globe. But it's not enough to protect Jewish bodies. We have to, people have to know why. It's not enough to say never again about the Holocaust or about October 7th. There has to be an understanding of why. What are we preserving? What are we growing? What are we evolving? What is the Jewish people and the Jewish mission? Why is it so important? And I think that kind of drives my interest in this area. And then I would say on a personal level, I think you hit it right on the head, which is that I grew up the grandchild of survivors. I knew that family, first of all, was so important, that your family could be taken away in a second, something unfortunately that we've been reminded of since October 7th, that people just, you have one life and then immediately you have a different life. And I was raised to care deeply about the Jewish people. I was raised to care deeply about Jewish leadership. Lay leadership roles. My grandfather, who was a Holocaust survivor, Murray Pantier, headed his federation, served on many boards, was involved with the U.S. Holocaust Commission and the creation of the museum down in Washington. My father served on all different boards. My mother, all different people in my lives, my aunts and uncles, everyone was serving lay leaders Jewishly, and I sort of followed that path. I think my first major experience of that was at the University of Pennsylvania. I was the student president, the president of the Hill, and I had my first taste of what it's like to be a leader of a Jewish community in some way. And at the same time, I felt a major imposter syndrome. Despite having gone to, what was then Salman Schechter, now Golda Ach Academy in West Orange, and being exposed to an Orthodox synagogue and being around Jewish learning, I felt like, how could I possibly be a leader in the Jewish people? I barely know any Torah. I know nothing, which, it seems crazy because there's so many people who have even less exposure these days to Torah. And that really sparked me on a journey of trying to learn more Torah, trying to understand what our tradition was really about, trying to join a really larger conversation that's been going on for thousands of years, not just trying to understand God, but trying to understand the people that have informed that conversation. And that kind of got me going on this path.
And before we get to the learning, let's just talk about what you absorbed from your family, because it's a very powerful thing to have all four be survivors. Was the never again mantra kind of at every Shabbat table? Was it at every Seder table? Was this just a kind of a constant drumbeat that somehow conferred a sense of obligation? How was it in a way woven through your upbringing?
So I think the never again in some ways actually felt like more of I would say a job out there. It felt like, that's a thing we have to do with our free time. I would say in terms of the familial aspect, kind of what was driven home in my family and my home, I think it was more personal than just never again. Not that never again so small, it's important. But I think a huge piece was family. My grandfather, for example, lost all his siblings, both his parents. He was by himself. He had an uncle who survived, an aunt, and I think that really stressed the importance of family, which became the core, and on both sides of my family. Family together all the time are my closest friends growing up to this day, are my siblings, my cousins. It was, that important of valuing of family and how important family is. I think that was one of them. I think the second one was certainly in the stories I heard from my grandparents, that humans had choice. Right? We often focused on this kind of thing that happened, or where was God? But if you sit and listen to their stories, in all the details, there are humans who had choices at different points along the way. And I think the power of choice is something that comes through deeply in terms of my Holocaust upbringing. And then the third, I would say, is the idea that God gives you gifts and you have responsibility to use them. In my grandfather's language, either you're in a position to help and you must, or you're in a position to ask for help and you must as well. And that wherever you are, whatever space you're in, you need to work with what you have to serve in some way, this idea of service.
How did these messages get transmitted? Is he literally saying this to you? Is he sitting you down? Or is it just, at the dinner table, is this over matzo brie?
Yeah, you make me emotional thinking of my grandfather. I think that there was certainly conversations. He passed away in 2008, but the way he lived his life, the things he shared with us, he was one of those survivors actually who I never heard him tell the same story. Even though he would speak in schools, Jewish, non-Jewish, all over the place, there was always a particular lesson from his story for that particular audience. And so I think he also modeled for me the idea of learning from the story. And I think the peak of that for my grandfather was Schindler's List, because my grandfather was saved by Oskar Schindler, and then there was this moment, he was very close with Steven Spielberg, involved with the movie. Several of his stories came through in the movie, and I think this moment of the importance of getting stories out there so that people can not only know but learn from those stories.
How did Spielberg find him?
So he was interviewed in Thomas Keneally's original book about Schindler's List, along with both of his partners who were also saved by Oskar Schindler. They actually
partners, meaning?
Sorry, thank you. It's a longer story, but maybe we'll do that as a whole segment one day, which I'd love to do. But he started a real estate company with his uncle and his best friend, who are all, let's call them Schindler Jews. They actually, I guess somewhat famously at this point, stayed very close with Oskar Schindler after the war. They helped him. They were in relationship with him. For my grandfather's 25th wedding anniversary, he flew in and stayed in my mother's room for the anniversary, and we have a photo of all the survivors lifting Schindler on a chair.
Oh my gosh.
It's unbelievable. So he was very close with Schindler, and they actually, as real estate developers, they chose to honor Schindler by every time they built a new development in New Jersey, they would request from the town to name one of the streets after Schindler. So now there's over 25 Schindler Drives and Schindler Roads and Schindler Courts all over New Jersey.
And that was before the movie?
That was before the movie. They had a terrible time getting it through. Many of the towns said, no chance. Like, choose Maple or Walnut. Why are you choosing Schindler? We've never heard of this before.
To this day, are they called?
Yeah, they're all there now. And of course, after the movie came out, they started getting letters from people and thank you so much, and so much pride to live on a Schindler Drive or a Schindler Court.
Wow, that's amazing. And so, I know it's a longer thing, but in terms of how he actually got out, can you tell us?
My grandfather?
Yeah, at what age?
He doesn't know. He to this day, I actually wish I could have asked him this because I didn't think of it. You think of the questions after they're gone. The way he told it was that he doesn't know how his name appeared on Schindler's List. An angel put his name on the list. They said his name, Mojitz Pantier, or what I called him, Murray Pantier, sheet metal worker. Which he was not. Sorry, making me emotional, Abby. Which he was not, and his name appeared, and that's it. And he was saved by Schindler. I don't know. He was born, I would say, about 15 or 16, maybe 17, something like that. But the question I would have asked him was, I just had the amazing merit of naming my son about a year and a half ago after my grandfather. And his middle name, he was Moshe, was his Hebrew name, and he really was our Moshe as a family. But his middle name was Michael, the angel of God. And so it was really important to me to keep that name for my son. But he always constantly was talking about the angel putting him on the list. I never had the chance to ask him if he ever thought about the connection between his middle name being the name of an angel of God and the fact that he felt like an angel really intervened in his life. But
and your grandmother?
His wife, my grandmother, passed away this past year. Also saved. My other three grandparents were all kind of sent east during the war, so it was a different experience. But they, lost relatives, lost family members, survived, and were not as passionate about talking about it as my grandfather. But I think it's still, I could spend time talking about each of them the way that it kind of flowed through their lives. Certainly, commitment to family, commitment to the holidays, commitment to physical security of their children and grandchildren. Fears of anti-Semitism, I think for sure were there. There are moments of being politely requested not to wear a kippah in public, to be careful, those kind of things. Those are real concerns.
So after October 7th, I'm sure your mind has gone a lot of places in terms of just what this legacy was that you were given, and then seeing what happened.
Yeah.
So how do you kind of put these things together?
So if I'm being totally honest, I think in the beginning, the day of the shock, I remember coming into synagogue, and you're walking in with your kids, you're all smiles, you walk in, and it's Shabbat morning, I don't know any information, and you see certain people's faces. We have security in our synagogue, and those people know more information because they're using their phones regularly for security reasons, and just totally in shock and not trying to wrap your head around it. And there was a second day of no phones because that was Saturday morning, and Sunday was Simchat Torah. So it's kind of like this thing where you're just hearing word of mouth from humans around you and trying to understand what's happening, and being told, also seeing someone in the street, that this Israeli who lives in your town got on a plane already, right? There's this weird thing. I'm an Orthodox Jew going through this experience of I'm in the bubble of the holiday, and I'm getting trickles of moments, and I'm feeling the pain. And then at the same time, you're seeing other people who are like, they're gone, or they heard so-and-so died, right? Stories like that are trickling through. And then if I'm being really, really honest, I didn't realize how much, I guess, let's call it in modern phrase, like PTSD I had from the Holocaust. I think initially for me, like I could barely look. I could barely look because it felt like, and I think my father-in-law, who's Israeli, felt the same way.
You mean look at the pictures?
Yeah,
look at the images.
and go into and like accept that this was happening in some ways, right? That like, and there's a parallel lane of that I see in my father-in-law, that I see, and I feel like Israelis who have been around since the beginning of the state of Israel also, where there's PTSD there of like what Israelis have been through to get to this moment, and then to have a moment like that, which they thought was unfathomable. So I think like American Jews had this like post-Holocaust American Judaism, this type of thing will never happen again. And Israeli had this like, post-67, post-Yom Kippur War, this will never happen again. And I think it was like numbing in some ways. It was so much at once that it was like almost numbing. Actually, my wife was amazing. My wife, Tali, she like hit the ground running next day, packing bags, doing all those things. And I was just like, thank you. And I was like, let me focus on, loving our kids, like, putting them to sleep, making sure they're fed. Like, you be the hero in our family, and like run around, do the things that you need to do. Like,
and when you say packing, she was like getting things to
everything.
Israel.
Yeah, our community
Clothes.
mobilized immediately. There were all these questions: who's going to, like, we need to raise money, we need to get duffels, we need to get the word out, we need to start dealing with social media wars, like all those things. Like, just everyone trying to find ways to mobilize and respond from wherever they were. It goes back to my grandfather's teaching, right? You're in a position to help, and you must. Like, everyone just trying to look at themselves. What can I do? Who do I know?
So then it shifts almost immediately to a shocking anti-Semitism.
Yeah.
And I think even it was, there was the rally in Times Square the next day that was supportive of Hamas. It was everywhere on social media, and it was in the streets of our neighborhoods in New York City. It was all over the country, it was all over the world. How are you squaring not just the lack of empathy, but the actual, those who have celebrated what happened on October 7th and continue to?
I'll say a few things on that. I think on lots of different levels of the world. I think some of the things that are happening seem completely incoherent. Both the success of the attack and the way the attack was taken out, like in terms of the way that women and children and elderly people were treated, just seems like I can't wrap my head around it. And similarly, the kind of incoherent things that really just make no sense to me that people are saying out there. So there's a part of my brain that is also just like, feels like when things like that are so incoherent happen, like there needs to be a moment of looking above, a moment of looking up and just saying like, God, what are you trying to communicate with us right now? Like what, if we believe that God protects us, which I do, and there are moments where that protection slips away for a millisecond and something can go bad, and then something massive happens, it feels like it's a moment for me to reevaluate the relationship between not just Jews, but the world, people, and the divine. And then it also raises for me a moment of, okay, how do I relate to the Jewish people? How do I relate to the world? what's going on there? Like, can I think about those relationships? And then, on more rational levels, I think some of the things that come up, there's many, but one is, what is the world that I imagine in America or in the globe, right? I remember feeling like uncomfortable watching my sports teams, listening to secular music, not because specifically those people were saying something about Israel, but this moment of like, wow, wait, if like all these people are just like, I don't even know, by the way, that it's their feelings. I think sometimes it's economic. I think we've entered into a world where there's no distinction between the human and the business, because everyone's is a brand on social media or on modern media. And so suddenly I feel like a lot of people are kind of choosing, like they'll just like, oh, everyone's saying this, so I should say this. Who cares about a search for truth? Or given my audience, what should my brand say? Well, there's this many Jews in the world and this many non-Jews in the world, so
might as well
the
play
economics,
to the
right?
majority.
I need to get numbers. Everything is economically driven. And so I think that there's elements of that which are very disappointing, and it shows that we've moved away from search for truth and we've really moved towards search for likes, let's say, which is difficult. The other piece, of course, you mentioned, I'm a graduate of the University of Pennsylvania and Harvard Law School, so I had this whole moment also, and I'm involved with those schools, helping raise funds for both of them, as an alum.
So can you say what you were doing when all of this was?
Right. So great. So I think let's get into that question as well, which is that I think that there was an important response from people, which was a feeling of certain institutions we feel are failing us, right? Whether they're universities or otherwise. There's been all this talk, and now something's off here. We've missed something here. I think that's super important. I still don't know to this day what are the goals or ramifications, let's say, right? There's a lot of when that moment happened of this person saying something anti-Semitic, this person needs to be like really trying to stop people where they are, which I think I understand the value in that. If you feel like someone's doing something that's taking us in the wrong direction, there needs to be accountability. The same thing, I said safety in a middle school. If a student cannot feel safe on a campus, something needs to be, it's fundamental. That's like a absolute zero, nothing to talk about there, right? But I also, I think we need the combination of the carrot and the stick, if that makes sense. And I feel like there was a lot of stick coming out, which you have to. You're under attack. You need to come out with the stick. But it goes back to the question of why preserve Jewish bodies. There also needs to be the moment of thinking about the forging the relationships, the having the conversations beyond. And it's no one's fault. I think we live in an era of everyone's canceling everyone. So the tool you have is to cancel people instead of trying to bridge connections, trying to connect with people and actually have that conversation. Be like, can you actually spend some time learning about the Jewish people or about the state of Israel? So I think, I guess time will tell where these strategies take us 5-10 years from now, and also how much they develop. It's one of those moments where, if only the people were right that there was an organized Jewish approach to the world, which of course there's not, right? We have more opinions than anyone else in the world. But to the extent that there were more people getting in a room and actually thinking about what are our strategies in different fronts and how can we employ the skills and the people that we have to try to achieve them. But right now it seems like a lot of people are just trying to do whatever they can from wherever they are.
And in a way, we're not really looking at the long view. It's because every day adds its own stress and kind of makes our blood pressure go up, and we want immediate redress to whatever we're feeling as the injury. I want to just talk about why you chose rabbinical school.
Okay.
Because it's not necessarily, it's logical in the sense that maybe you would have started there, but first you kind of went in a more traditional corporate, am I allowed to say, was it a kind of a corporate route? Or is that an oversimplification?
Sure.
I'm not saying that with any disparagement.
I don't think so either. I have many friends who are on the corporate route, and they're delightful people.
After Harvard, what was the plan in your head?
Yeah. So the way I think about it, I spoke of my grandfather's name. I'm very into names and the power of names. So I think about it as my name. I'm Yosef Shmuel, Joseph Samuel, and I think of those as kind of in some ways, both, by the way, people who were murdered in the Shoah and the Holocaust, both uncles of mine, or great uncles of mine, I should say, and I think of Yosef and Shmuel as kind of two paradigms that have shaped the way that I've thought about my life. Yosef being the consummate lay leader, someone who kind of made his way up, let's call it the corporate world, as you put it, and did not lose sight of his Jewish mission, his connection to God, I would say grew in those spaces over time. and served the Jewish people, looked out for his family, looked out for the Jews, and looked out for the country that he lived in. And I think that was a model that I saw in my grandfather, Murray Pantier, in my father, Alan Pines, as well, and in many around me. And then I had this kind of other inkling, which was Samuel, which was actually named after a great uncle of mine who was sent away to study. He was before the war, he was sent away to study because he showed promise as a Jewish learner, and unfortunately the yeshiva where he was at was destroyed and they were murdered. And that side, Samuel the prophet, was someone who was a kippah wearing, openly in public. I'm trying to help the Jewish people. This is my full-time job, and I think that I early in my life assumed that I would be in that former category. That I would, I remember when I was at Paul Weiss, joining all different, Jewish orgs and sitting on boards and chairing dinners and doing those things. And I remember feeling very worried that none of my most talented colleagues who had an interest in this area were going down that path, that they were all working at Google and Goldman Sachs and other law firms and doing those things, and that there was going to kind of be a dearth, that our talent wasn't going towards Jewish education. And I felt like, as my grandfather said, either if you're in a position to help, you must. And maybe I would be in a position to do better help if I stayed on the corporate track. I'll find out when I meet my maker one day. But it felt like there was an opportunity and also an interest for me, not necessarily even to become a rabbi immediately, but I really wanted to become deeply educated, learn more about our tradition, really immerse myself in it, try to grow through Torah, and then use that inspiration to try to inspire others.
So you go from Harvard to Paul Weiss. All of this time, are you doing Jewish study in some kind of structural, organized way? Is that just on your own? Are you wearing a kippah, if you don't mind my asking? How identified are you as kind of like the big Jew moving through these spaces?
I was committed to, I think, the whole path. I would say since my bar mitzvah, when I decided that I wanted to start keeping Shabbat and I really wanted to wear tefillin every day and pray every day, I've kind of always been on a trajectory of trying to grow.
That was your decision?
That was my decision, yeah. There was my friend Molly Andron's father came to our school, Goldock Academy, and said, when you turn 13, you're responsible for your choices. And I felt very inspired by that, and it felt like an opportunity to
make some choices.
Make some choices. And my parents, who were of traditional background, and my father had grown up keeping Shabbat as well, were very, thank God, supportive of that. So I think the whole way there's kind of been, and I try to explain this to people who are, let's call them, becoming closer to Judaism today, that it's one step at a time. So I would say that always one step at a time. How that looked, I think, varied. The most accessible things I would say are books in English about Jewish thought or Jewish biographies, right? I think there were moments of trying to learn Jewish ideas through accessible ways like that. I started when I was at Paul Weiss meeting someone named Yoni Greenwald, who's an amazing Jewish educator, in the mornings to learn Talmud before I went to work. I'm trying to remember, I think we learned Sanhedrin at the time, if I remember correctly. And that was really sitting.
Now you're dropping names.
Yeah, now I'm dropping, let's go. And that was kind of starting to really start ramping up a little bit in the mornings and really try to start building technical skills. Because I think you realize quickly and somewhat painfully that there's only so far you can go in English alone. And it's, by the way, it's changed, I would say, even since when I was, in whatever it was, 15 years ago at the law firm. Now it's exploded the amount of English resources out there. And with the rise of Safari, there's really a lot of resources. But certainly back then, you needed to really know Hebrew and Aramaic and Biblical Hebrew to get access to Jewish ideas more thoroughly.
I know you went to Israel. What year was that?
So I actually went to Israel for the first time to learn at Pardes after college, before law school. I actually...
let's explain Pardes for those who don't know.
Pardes is a pluralistic place of Jewish study for really post-college people. Most of the programs available out there are pre-college. It's really hard to find non-18-year-old programs where people are learning Judaism seriously.
It's an amazing place.
Amazing place. Very grateful for my time there. And I actually, I struck a deal with my parents where I said to them, I really want to study in Israel for the year, and they offered to pay for me to go to Israel for the year if I got into one of the top 3 law schools. So I actually studied hard for the LSATs to get into Israel, if you can imagine that. And I did well on the LSATs because I really wanted to go to Israel. So that was my first time in Israel. And then when I left Paul Weiss, before I enrolled full-time at Yeshivat Chovevei Torah, I spent a summer in Israel at a place called Machon Shlomo, which is, if you know Me'or on campus. It's in Har Nof. It's more of a I think I used the word kiruv, a place that's like focusing on bringing people deeply into Jewish practice. And then I spent a third year in Israel during my time at Chovevei Torah, where I was at a place called Gush, Yeshivat Har Etzion, which they call like kind of the Harvard of yeshivas. And I spent my time at a place called Oraita, which is in the Old City. I got married that year, and my wife wanted to live in Jerusalem and not Alon Shvut. So we moved, and I learned there. So that was those are the years I spent in Israel, and hopefully more in the future.
And Chovevei Torah, why did you choose it? What drew you to that avenue of learning? I'm obviously a big supporter of that gang.
Sure.
But it is not necessarily the obvious path.
I think really initially Rabbi Avi Weiss. My father had been a Wexner Heritage Fellow, and he had had Rabbi Avi Weiss as a teacher there, and I'd gotten to know him a little bit. I got to know him, and I spent some time with him. I was very moved by him and everything about him. I think initially it was that, and then the second piece was encountering Rabbi Irving Yitz Greenberg, who we had the amazing luck. My synagogue in Livingston was looking to hire a new rabbi, and we had a high holiday season with no rabbis, and so Rabbi Greenberg and Blue came and led our high holidays that year. I remember
That's his wife.
That's his wife, Blue Greenberg.
Who started Jofa.
Yes. If you don't know Blue Greenberg, look up Blue Greenberg.
She's a giant.
Yes, amazing. I could talk about them for hours as well. But that was my first walk. I remember walking with them on Rosh Hashanah afternoon and getting to know them a little bit. And between those two, it really.
I want to just pause a little bit on Yitz because, and I can call him that too, because he's a good friend of my parents, and still an amazing mentor to me. The thing about Yitz is that he has left so many people in his wonderful wake who feel like he changed their Judaism. Mm-hmm. And I want to kind of get at how for you, because it seems like it's not just his way of teaching, it was his theology itself that was transformative.
Mm-hmm. Thank you for that question. So Rav Yitz, really, I think I had all this in my heart about Judaism and all this in my brain, and Rav Yitz kind of like laid out a way that it all made sense for me for the first time, and that really started with the idea of, as he puts it, Tselem Elokim, the idea of us being created in God's image, and his big thesis, which is coming out in his book, which is forthcoming this summer finally, thank God, which is the idea that every human being is created in God's image, and therefore each human is of infinite value, equal value, and unique value, and that we should go through the world trying to create a society in which every human is created as infinitely valuable, equal to each other, and unique. And that actually, if you look deeply at each of the commandments, the mitzvot, you will see that what they are trying to do is to increase the quality of life in the world. And he can do it you can pick him on the spot and he'll do it. And so I think that approach to life kind of gave me like a clear theological roadmap for how I wanted to go through things.
I would say part of his theology also is that we have a job to do as human beings in partnership with God. That there is this sense of not just obligation, but kind of like figuring out what our role is. And is that something that guides you at all? For
sure. I think that, as I mentioned, I think I got some of that from my grandfather before, but I was thinking of Rav Yitz. But yes, 100%, one of the core teachings of Rav Yitz, the idea of covenant, the idea of being in covenant with God, being in partnership, and that same thing, this idea of what's our job in the covenant. I think that's, by the way, not only taught me about how to relate to God and the Jewish people, but how to be a husband and how to be a parent. I think I remember the first time Rav Yitz and Blue had us over, had Tali and I over for dinner when we were engaged, and just like seeing them together in it. And then when I had the amazing merit of working for Rabbi Greenberg for 3 years, where I was, in Riverdale at their home and seeing the way they interacted.
And what were you doing? Were you helping with his book?
So I was helping to develop a nonprofit with him, which is now what we mentioned before, the J.J. Greenberg Institute for the Advancement of Jewish Life.
That's named for his son.
Exactly. And I was helping him on a variety of writing projects, one of which, one is his master thesis that's coming out this year, The Triumph of Life, and the second is more of
How many pages is that?
I'm not sure offline, but I think 3 digits, not 4 digits.
Okay.
But I think it will be such a gift to humanity. It's
extraordinary.
I've been very close to many chapters.
Everyone's been waiting for this book for how many years?
And it's the type of thing that like people 1,000 years from now will be looking up information in there, and it'll just be a resource for everyone. So I'm very grateful that it's going to see the light. And then the second project we worked on, which I was heavily involved in, was and is coming out also in the coming months, was a commentary and translation on what's called the Or Yisrael. So the founder of the Musar movement, Jewish character development, we worked together on a commentary and translation of his most famous work, including a new introduction and some other pieces around there. So that's a separate thing, which is kind of like an interest area of Rabbi Yitz's and mine where we overlapped, which was what's called the Musar movement.
And can you explain that movement a little bit? I think some people have had a taste of it, but
great. So the Musar movement is one could argue that Musar, which literally means like teaching, the Musar movement basically takes the idea that like in some ways all of Jewish Torah, all of Jewish text is about telling us how to behave, but the Musar movement realized that reading a text alone doesn't make you different, right? You could read a text about losing your temper less, but unless you develop strategies to lose your temper less, you're not going to lose your temper less. And so Rabbi Salanter kind of developed a whole sense of way of thinking. In some ways, some argue before or at the same time as Freud, of like tapping into the unconscious or the subconscious to actually develop models to become the person that you are through actual strategies of the way you learn, the way you act, the way you practice, and all those kinds of things. And that was launched then, and it's evolved since then. There's been generations since then, and I encountered a book called Alei Shur, which is a famous book, but only in Hebrew. That's why you need to know Hebrew, by Rabbi Shlomo Volbe. And he was someone who lived after the Holocaust, and he really lays out a modern way of thinking about how to grow through Torah, for lack of a better term, how to become a better person through Torah, and the importance of focusing on that. And I became totally deeply interested in that during my time in yeshiva, and then connected with Rabbi Yitz around that as well.
But in terms of how that translates to your actual life, you talked about being a father, a husband, a friend. Can you give even an example of where one of those either principles or kind of teachings actually changes your behavior?
Great. I'll give a big one and a small one, if that makes sense. So I would say that probably my core midah, my core character trait is that at least I strive for. My core, is that I talk fast, exactly.
You need to work on that, Justin.
I do need to work on that. Thank you, Abby. I appreciate that.
No, I actually like fast talkers because I'm a New Yorker.
Yeah, no, it's hard to slow down the brain sometimes.
Okay, let's go back to your examples. I don't want to derail you.
Yeah, that's
Big
great.
And small.
I appreciate it, and that's a good example of that. The first is what's called hit lamdut, which is a Hebrew word I think invented by Rav Volbe, who I mentioned before, which is kind of the idea of a learning stance. The idea that no matter what you're doing in life, you are learning to try to improve. You're trying to take one step at a time further. So we're not having this interview, we're practicing having this interview, right? And I'm not, in any moment, I'm not doing the thing, I'm learning how to do the thing. He concludes powerfully at the end of the chapter on that, say, we don't die, we learn how to die. And so having a mindset of constantly learning wherever we're going and not feeling conceited because we got something right and not feeling terrible because we got something wrong, but just really having that learning stance. So that's like, I think it's almost like a pre-character trait. Like that seems like core, so I focus on that a lot. That's changed me. And then to just give you like a very practical example is the mezuzah. So the mezuzah is a ornament that we have on the doorpost of Jewish homes, which includes Torah language on the inside, and often is something that we kind of pass. Some people have the habit to kiss the mezuzah before they go in. It's there. An example of a Musar practice for me, a Jewish character development practice for me, is when I come home from a day at work, before I go into my home, I pause, I look at the mezuzah, I take a second to clarify, what do I expect to be on the other side of that door? Who do I want to be when I go through that door? I kiss the mezuzah, and then I go in. And it's life-changing, right? The mezuzahs are there. It's there. I did my mitzvah. I put the mezuzah on the door. I said the blessing. But it's very different to think about how I interact with Jewish ritual as a way to improve myself. And then I can have a game plan. My kids are going to be excited to see me. I shouldn't be looking at my phone, right? I have to, will my wife need help? Will she be home? Is someone else, trying to really prepare for the following few minutes and really try to do my best in that moment. And I use them as a spark that. And I think that's across Jewish ritual. It's not something that we're trying to check a box. The Musar mindset says, how is it sparking me to be a better person, to grow through Torah?
But I've interviewed Orthodox Jews often who say, the ritual's the ritual, it's kind of rote for me. Mm-hmm. And in a way, what you're saying is the Musar slows it down a little bit. It kind of gets back to the intention of the ritual or of the prayer. Is that right? Most of us are running into the door.
Yeah.
We're not taking that pause.
Yeah, and trust me, there's many days where I forget to run through the door, let's be honest here. But I think that it's very difficult to stay present in general. And certainly with something that you're doing over and over again, right? And there are plenty of mitzvot, commandments that I do regularly. We know we say grace after meals. My daughter gives me the hardest time she tells her friend, my dad can say it in under 30 seconds. And I'm like, I'm not proud of that. That means I've been saying it so long that I don't know how to be present with it anymore. So I think that, we try to find new ways to tap in. And I can't do that for every mitzvah every day, but we're trying to learn that. And I think, Rav Volbe, who I'll quote again, says, if you sit and learn Torah and you get up from learning that Torah and you don't have a vision for how you're going to be different in the world, you've done idolatry. Right? That's the language that he uses. Right? Because suddenly it's edutainment. Suddenly it's an academic exercise, and it can't be an academic exercise.
It has to translate into your life.
Yeah, you're trying to improve the human that you are, one step at a time, through the study of Torah, through prayer, through ritual, all those pieces.
It really makes me think about how often I think Judaism does slow us down. Even though you are a fast talker, I am too. Shabbat forces us to pause, to stop, to get off of devices, etc. And I guess I want to sort of bring that back to JBS, because one of the things that Rabbi Golub did was just take time, with people at the table. And we're not living in a kind of media world where people take time that much very often anymore. There's, as you mentioned, the soundbite. TikTok is now where most people I now understand under 20 are getting their news. That is kind of a shocking reality. Talk about lack of depth, lack of nuance. So how do you see JBS kind of holding on to the slowing down of something, to the full conversation, to the layers of an issue or a story, and even in the joy of it? I interviewed 3 musicians at this table, and they basically created a nigun at the table in front of me. And, that's to me the magic of our tradition and of those who do what they do to kind of take us to a different spiritual place. But there's not a lot of room for it anymore. So where's the sort of JBS path? Through the short attention span.
Sure. First of all, I love that program. Noah Aronson was my classmate at Gold Ox Academy, actually, and I love that program.
Thank you for saying that.
Yeah, really,
I love it too.
I remember where I was when I watched it. It was great. I think that to use Rabbi Golub's language, which came through in the tribute we did for him recently,
which is beautiful,
which was amazing.
Everybody watch that.
So powerful and beautiful.
It's on YouTube.
And as someone who didn't get the chance to meet him one-on-one, that was really, our team did an amazing job of putting it together, and I was so happy to have those opportunities.
And we have to give a special shout out to his daughter,
yes,
Dara Golub, who sings so beautifully on with her sister, and I just think shepherded that beautifully with the team.
And continues to shepherd so many aspects of our work here so beautifully. So one of the things that came up there in the conversation, I don't know if it was him or someone talking about him, was saying that it felt like when you were being interviewed by Rabbi Golub that it was a Shabbat table conversation, right? And I think that for me, the mindset I come in, and as we're in development to the programming that I'm going to run here, thinking about how do you bring that Shabbat table mindset to our conversations? How do we enter this space, slow down? We were talking before, saying just hanging out, Abby. We're just hanging out and having a conversation. We're having a Shabbat afternoon conversation. There's no, so trying to have that mindset in our conversations, I think, is so important. First of all, just in the content and the programming that we create. Can we embody that? And then your second question around how do you do those types of conversations and then, let's call it, compete in a world where there's so much noise. So I think the most important thing is to not throw the baby out with the bathwater, right? We're not going to be a place that starting tomorrow is we create 7-second clips to get people's attention. I think actually if you were to whittle it down, most of what's out there is really just the modern version of marketing, right? Instead of putting a billboard in Times Square, which is right behind us right now, you're trying to get people to learn about your org by putting those 1-minute videos. But I think that it would be, if you were to tell me...
When you say org, you mean organization.
Organization, thank you. If you were to tell me 10 years from now we have this many millions of views for a 7-second clip, but no one's taking the time to delve a little bit deeper, then we've missed something. But if no one's watching because we're not meeting them in the public square to bring them into those longer form programs where they can experience you having a 30-minute or 60-minute serious interview with someone, we need to do both for this to do well.
And I want to kind of end with B'Tselem Elohim, because you mentioned Yitzhak Greenberg's teaching, and I know that's something that's guided you. And I think for Jews post-October 7th, that is a more challenging kind of Jewish core value right now. And it's not that we don't have empathy, but it's that we've seen so many not have empathy for us. And yet we have to somehow hold on to these principles with which you were raised and I was raised. And so I guess in terms of voices at the JBS table, and I mean not just the non-Jew, but the Jew who disagrees with what you might feel, I feel. How do you approach pluralism, ideological pluralism, the fact that we are so polarized, and that some, even in our community, are going to believe things and say things and argue for things that are, in a way, anathema to our own sense of right and wrong?
Yeah. Everyone's nice until there's something at stake, I guess, right? I think it's such an important question. I'll say that I almost perhaps a character flaw of mine is that I am super heavy on the empathy side, or I think in character traits because of Musser, and I've noticed that I can make an excuse and defend, maybe that's the lawyer side of me as well, for really almost anyone. Well, this is how they ended up there, all those kinds of things. So I think I'm aware of that.
Meaning this is how they ended up with these opinions.
Right. You can imagine someone, I'm a rabbi and a lawyer, so people come to me with lots of their secrets sometimes, and there's always like, I can totally explain what the other person was doing, but that's not always what people are looking for. So I have that, that's a blind spot of my thinking in general. So I'm aware of that. I don't know if that'll affect this answer as well. I think safety first. Right, safety first, I think, is still the important thing that we said before. I think there's differences now than there were in the past.
Let me stop you there.
Yeah.
Safety meaning even for our viewers.
I think anyone who is trying to incite violence in any way or making Jews feel unsafe, I don't want to be broadcasting that and trying to, raise that voice more. At the same time, I think, not at the same time, I'll say, in addition, I do believe that there is what to learn from any human on the planet. That, if you sat two humans side by side to have that conversation, instead of those two humans fighting through liking and unliking and posting things, that there could be some element of learning from one another. Again, until, I am as optimistic about that as possible until safety comes into concern, right? You can't, if someone's coming at you with a weapon, you can't say but I feel like if we just talk, we'll work this out. And so I think that we have to take that into consideration. And the last thing I'll say is that I think it's important to have different people. People have different skill sets. I think that I am drawn more towards education, curiosity, learning from people, trying to understand them, connecting deeply with them. It doesn't come as easily to me to be like a political advocate, but I think it's super, super important that we have people who are advocating economically, politically, socially on behalf of the Jewish people. I mean, I used to run the teen programming at Hartman, and I remember one of the things that came out of that for me, everyone's like, we need to prepare these college students to be able to fight on campus. I don't think that's true.
Hartman wasn't saying that. Parents were saying that.
Oh, thank you for clarifying that. Yes. I was in that space, and people who heard it, not even the Hartman parents, but people who were like, you're going to the teen space, go fix that. Right, I think one of the things that we did differently there, thank you for clarifying that, that's why we chat, is that I think arm them to understand their identity, arm them to know why they care about what they care about, arm them to have a healthy relationship with God, the Jewish people, the state of Israel, all those things. From among that group, if some of them want to be the one who participates in the debate, and someone else wants to express themselves through comedy, and someone else wants to be a dancer, right? It's not everyone's job that they have to it's their job to bring forward the Jewish tradition in the way that they do that best. And it's their job to use the skills they're given, to come full circle here, to serve the Jewish community. But being a political advocate is not the only way to serve the Jewish community. I think that we need to continue to have a variety of ways for people to serve the Jewish community.
So final question is just, when you step back and you look at the North American Jewish community right now, not just the psyche, but a sense of kind of purpose and what's next, what actually makes you hopeful? And as much as you want to tie it in with your new job, feel free.
Mm-hmm. So there's been a big Jewish peoplehood moment right now where people are turning, I would say the word inwards a little bit, looking back towards the Jewish people, looking back towards Jewish community, feeling like they shouldn't have run away from the synagogue so quickly. They shouldn't have, run out there so quickly. And I think there's that moment of Jewish peoplehood. And I think that what they're also starting to realize is that alongside Jewish peoplehood is, let's call it, Jewish mission, right? And that there's a moment of, wow, similar to almost my moment in college when I was involved with the Hillel, where I was like, I'm really excited about the Jewish people, but I also want to learn more. I get phone call after phone call from friends from all different walks of life who are not in like the throes of the Jewish community right now, that are curious now, that are saying, I'm thinking about making a bat mitzvah for my daughter, which was not on my radar before this, right? I'm thinking about learning more Judaism. I want to learn 5 minutes a day. Can you connect me with someone? And I think that in addition to this sense of feeling an obligation towards the Jewish people, I think there's a growing interest in people learning more about why Judaism and like what the Jewish mission is. And I hope that one of the roles that we can play, our parent company name is Jewish Education and Media here, is that we can play that role of offering people a pluralistic buffet, let's call it a shmorg, to use a Jewish language, of the different ways in. It's not all the same, but whether it's learning about Jewish mysticism, Jewish character development, the Parsha, Talmud, exciting cultural ideas that are coming out, but there are so many on-ramps to Judaism right now, and can we offer that to people so that they can lean in?
I'm very excited about your new tenure and leadership, and I can say, because I was here before you, welcome to JBS. This has been a pleasure to be with you. I hope you'll all be very involved in JBS because we need you, and it matters that you're with us. I'm Abigail Pogrebin for In the Spotlight. See you next time.